All right. Well, welcome to our lunch study break. It is January 12th, 2022. 2022. We are in the future. It is crazy. It is Wednesday. It is noon, and we are going to have our noontime lunch theology session today. And with Martin Luther King weekend coming up this weekend, I really wanted to go and take a look at one of, I think, the most significant pieces written by a clergy member in the 20th century, his letter from a Birmingham jail. And in honor of him, I'd like to take a look at that today. And I'd like us to think about what he says about just and unjust laws, about civil disobedience, and what are the ways in which we are still grappling with the discrimination and some of the evil that he mentions in his letter from 1963. So I have, and I can share it with you, I have two versions. If I'm going to roll through it on the screen, hey, Marty, I'm going to roll through it on the screen, but if anybody's interested, I'm also going to I have an abridged version that I'm going to use. So this is the abridged version that I'm going to use. The reason I'm using an abridged version, I normally wouldn't, is because I bite off more than I choose. I bite off more than I can chew every week in this class, and I don't want to do that this week. The second letter I posted is the full letter, but the abridged is actually quite wonderful, and I went through the full letter yesterday, and I highlight a whole bunch of sections, and then I realized it was long, and then I went to the abridged, and all the highlight sections, pretty much all of my highlight sections are in the abridged version. So a little background I think is necessary so that I can share with you. I think we all are familiar with Dr. King and the March on Washington and his I Have a Dream speech. This letter from the Birmingham jail was an open letter that he wrote on April 16th, 1963. It was during his 1963 Birmingham campaign, which was a series of marches and sit-ins aimed at ending the racial segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. It was a nonviolent campaign. And King was met with eventually King was, hold on a second here, arrested along with Ralph Abernathy and Fred Shuttlesworth, and he was put in a Birmingham jail. The letter he wrote was a response to a letter titled A Call for Unity, which was written during King's Birmingham campaign, which was widely published and was a letter written by 8 local white clergymen in which they took a different position, a critical position for Dr. King's march and his nonviolent approach. Okay, so what we are going to do is take a look at the letter now, and that's a good background to see how he's responding. So let's take a look here. It's written towards fellow clergymen. All right, and he says, "Dear fellow clergymen," and I think we should have enough time to go through this entire piece, but I do want to make sure if anyone wants to contribute, please interrupt me. So, while confined here in the Birmingham jail, I came across your recent statement calling our present activities unwise and untimely. So there were these 8 white clergymen who, in that call for unity piece, said that Dr. King's actions were unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. That's interesting, too. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in the hope of what will be a patient and reasonable terms. So in the letter, he's referred to as an outsider. So he first has to defend himself as not being an outsider here. So, but more basically, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, just as Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel. So am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown. So he has to establish why he's there. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. All right, so that's his broader argument as to why he is there. He feels that he has the right, especially being an American, to fight for the justice of anybody who is inside of this country. And he now goes on to describe 4 steps in a nonviolent campaign. The first is a collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. The second is negotiation. The third, self-purification. And the fourth, direct action. We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham, he says. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of the country. Its unjust treatment of Negroes in the courts is a notorious reality. These are hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with their city fathers, but the political leaders consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. So the opportunity came last September to talk with some of the leaders of the economic community, and in these negotiation sessions, certain promises were made, such as the promise to remove humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, Reverend Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights called a moratorium on the demonstrations. But as the weeks and the months unfolded, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise because the signs remained. As in so many experiences in the past, we were confronted with blasted hopes, and the dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled upon us. So we had no alternative except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. We were not unmindful of the difficulties involved, so we decided first to go through a process of self-purification. We started having workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asking ourselves the questions: are you able to accept the blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeals of jail? Very powerful setup here that Dr. King is describing a series of unjust, immoral, segregational practices in Birmingham that he feels compelled as a religious leader to go and address. And he feels that he does not have a good faith bargainer on the other side. And he's correct, probably. I don't know if any of us would think he did. And so he is going to argue not for violent confrontation, but what do you do when you are in an oppressive circumstance, when injustice persists and you do not seem to be able to effectuate any sort of dialogue or communication about that? And so this is his nonviolent proposal. Any thoughts before we get into? Any thoughts? Any feelings? Yeah, go, Lisa.
So we've been studying Masechet Megillah. Immediately, I think of Mordechai and Esther.
Beautiful, beautiful.
You are commanded to raise your voice
And that that is Esther in that moment. When Mordecai says to Esther, what's to say that you aren't exactly where you are right now for this very moment? And that is the voice that Dr. King is calling upon here in his letter. So, Susan, we're reading Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail in honor of Dr. King weekend. And we've just done a little bit of the setup to why nonviolent action will be necessary in Birmingham. You wrote something here. No, don't worry about that. Anyone can come and go at any point. All right, so you may ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, etc.? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could raise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, we see the need, that's not a good edit, for nonviolent gadflies to create this kind of tension. So this was the one area where they edited that I didn't love. So I want to go to the full letter here on this tension. I was mentioning, Rabbi, that I'm using an abridged version, which is very good because I want to get through the whole letter, but there's one section there that needed a little bit more explication. So just hold on 1 second here. Why don't I just click on the link I just gave all of you? That would probably be the smartest thing I could do, right? Hold on. Here we go. Great. Wonderful. All right. I was right there the whole time. All right. So here, if I share my screen now, we'll pull up the full letter. And because it's a little more, I think, theologically interesting here that this group would appreciate around this. So why direct action? And so part of it is like he needs to create leverage. He's got no leverage, right? He's got a faithless bargainer on the other side. He's got an injustice that he can't get anyone to pay attention to. And so he seeks to create a tension because to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I'm not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create that tension in the mind so that individuals could rise above the myths and the half-truths, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. All right, so what he wants to do is, in truth, create social tension. Okay. Now, my friends, hold on here. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without legal and nonviolent pressure. History is the long and tragic story of the fact that a privileged group seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Well, isn't that the truth? Individuals may see the moral light and give up their unjust posture, but as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups are more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given up by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed. according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinct jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. With the nations of Asia and Africa moving with jet-like speed, we still creep at horse and buggy pace. So this is going to get harsh because he's going to speak to those people who are sympathetic to his cause. Hardest part about this letter is that he doesn't go after the villains. He goes after those well-meaning clergy folks who just say, wait, don't disturb the peace. Time is not right now. This isn't the right approach. We are with you. For Dr. King, as the letter will unfold, that is the biggest threat. He says, perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait, but when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and you see the tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressed clouds of inferiority begin to form in their little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking in agonizing pathos, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you? When you are humiliated day in and day out by these nagging and offensive signs? I'm not going to read those. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can imagine and understand our legitimate, no, not imagine. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Well, that's really hard to hear. That's devastating. So I just want to take a moment. This is what Dr. King Day, this is why we have Dr. King Day. It's important. It's not part of our, if we didn't have Dr. King Day, maybe we wouldn't read this year after year, but we need to. How far do people think we've come from here? Does anybody want to share any thoughts?
We haven't gone far enough. I mean, it's so relevant today.
Tell me more, Susan.
Well, we've had Black Lives Matter movement, which has begun because of the murdering of Black people by police, and the society's become even more unequal than it was back then. The richer. I mean, it's the old story. And
yeah, I think what's interesting to me is this is recent history. I feel that way about the Shoah too. So that's where I'm coming from. This is recent history, and I think we like to have an illusion that it's distant history.
mm-hmm.
And I think that these behaviors and these segregations and these racist demonizations of others, I think they're still there. I think those risks are still real. And that's why I think every year when we read this letter or confronted with Dr. King, we're confronted with our own behavior and the ways in which, I don't know, maybe I've been a nice, complicit white clergy member myself. And I think that that's an important question that we have to ask. So let me move on here. You express, oh, this is brilliant. Watch this. I mean, you express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey Brown versus Board of Education, right? That's the Supreme Court decision of 54. Because that matters to us, at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us to consciously to break laws. One may want to ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws. I don't know what's wrong with this copy here, just and unjust. And I would like to, all right, let's go back to the other text here because I don't really, either I'm having trouble reading this text or that is just the way it is. Hold on. One may ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And he agrees with St. Augustine, who says an unjust law is no law at all. So what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? Anybody want to try? Anybody want to list an example of a law currently on the books in the city of San Francisco or the state of California, or the United States of America, that is unjust and worthy of disobeyment? I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I mean. Anybody? Lisa's got some, oh, who is someone talking? Howard, unmute yourself.
Yeah, you're muted.
Howard, you're muted, buddy. Yes, you're muted.
I got it. Don laughed before when Susan said something, and I did, and I, the old thing is he who laughs last doesn't get the joke. I was wondering what it was, but I don't remember what it was. I just remember I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. And in 1963, I was in college, barely, like my second year, I think. And I probably saw things like white and colored and that kind of thing, but not there. It was a different world to me. And we didn't have the kind of news. We didn't have the kind of, it's all over. It's all over you in 1963. And I was just, a number of blacks in my high school in Newark were mostly athletes. We had a really great basketball team because the coach found jobs in the neighborhood for kids' fathers. And so the kids moved into our neighborhood, and that's how Weequahic High School got.
Good really, day. That's good recruiter. I like that.
Yeah, but you kind of hear about stuff. You kind of see snippets about these things, but I was never in the South. I never got to Washington D.C. And that's now everybody travels everywhere. So I don't know why I'm saying anything, because basically I'm saying I was totally and I will acknowledge one other thing about me. I flunked high school English my second year. It's a great story, but I won't tell it to you. But I my vocabulary isn't the greatest. I just and I'm going to shut up too. But the fact is, that was not the world I grew up in.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, good. So
And
you,
others who are younger than me uh, um, started seeing more and more things that I would have seen later on in the 70s probably, but not in the early 60s.
yeah.
And
All
so
right.
I
That was
you
so that
know,
was Newark. That was Newark, New Jersey. So
Newark, yeah,
yeah.
a large black community, but not my neighborhood was Jewish.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you, Howard. Lisa.
So Howard, what was it that you weren't seeing? I didn't understand.
all the stuff that MLK was talking about.
I think he's saying that Newark was a place in which people got along, is what he's saying. That he didn't see instances of racism. Is
In my neighborhood,
his memory.
Yeah, they were
What
black
about in the
kids my
shul?
class.
I mean, growing up, I have to admit, I heard plenty of unfortunate Yiddish terms thrown around,
Yeah.
quite liberally, I might add.
See, my father was a first-generation American, and I knew he spoke Yiddish, but I never heard it. They were the generation that their kids were going to speak English, and so I missed all those jokes, and also some of those other things.
I didn't know. You know what? The Yiddish I know is probably those derogatory terms, almost exclusively, and they almost all begin with the word "s." Yes, Lisa.
So I'm a little, I didn't go to school in Newark, but I did go to nursery school in Newark, New Jersey. My parents' friends opened a nursery school because they were blacklisted because they were, it was on Shanley Avenue. It was a wonderful place. However, the neighbors in my town where I was then in Union were very upset because there was a little black child in the station wagon that came to pick us up and take us to nursery school. On the occasions when we went as a family to the shore, my mother ritualistically would point out to us when we passed one of the towns, she would say, "That's where the sign was, no Jews, no dogs." And she told us every time we passed there. It was a reality for them. They were not really automatically white privileged people. They grew up knowing that that was not the case. So, and then later, as you know, things really blew up in Newark.
Yeah, can I say one quick thing?
Yeah, and then I want to hear from Bob.
I grew up 2 blocks from Young Israel of Newark Orthodox Shul, and 4 blocks from what became whatever the Jewish hospital. And so I was in a little cocoon of Jewishness, and I didn't hear a lot of cussing.
That's nice. Bob, unmute.
Yeah. Just kind of regarding some unjust laws. I think a lot of the voter suppression laws that are kind of cropping up all throughout the South and even Wisconsin and other places too, certainly are something that I just find deplorable, and hopefully we can.
Which I didn't hear you. Which laws?
The laws.
Oh, the voter suppression. Yes. Yeah.
Just seem to be popping up in multiple states at this time. And it seems an inexorable force that just is going to continue for a while. And
that it just seems that there will always be people who are trying to disenfranchise other people. That I think like this. I think I agree with Susan. It just feels so unfortunately present reading Dr. King. And it's slightly sad to think about the progress that hasn't been made. Marty, did you want to add something?
Not about that, but about something that you read. So I don't know if somebody wanted to come.
No, that's all right. Go right ahead.
When he was talking about a little boy and what happens and how do you explain things, and then why wouldn't that little boy feel negatively toward a white person? So I grew up in Chicago and went to it was basically Jewish neighborhood for a long time. And then 6th grade, we had one child come into my classroom who was Black. And And slowly through the next years, I was there through the middle of my junior year. But my younger brother, 3 years younger, actually was just a handful of white children still by 8th grade, who he came home one day and he said he was being beaten up. We didn't even know he was being harassed and beat for being Jewish and white. And then he went to another school, but we stayed on a little bit, and I ended up living with cousins. But anyway, slowly.
Kids are the worst. I have a 7-year-old, and the stuff that children will say
Yeah.
is on, and they don't even know sometimes what they're saying. Sorry, Marty.
We know, and you're right. And we didn't know until he finally said, I'm not going back to school, and he was already in 8th grade. But anyway, so slowly more and more people came in that were Black, and it became more integrated. We were getting along, everyone was getting along. And then we were in different branches because it was growing so much in our neighborhood in Chicago. And literally at the door too, there were not clothes plain, what did they say? Clothes plain?
Plain clothes.
Oh, they weren't plain clothes, but they were literally people with guns and with a metal machine we had to go through to get into the high school.
Metal detector.
Not metal detector. And so, but anyway, as I was going into more of my junior year, and there were a lot of younger freshmen, almost all Black by that time, and the freshmen and African-American Black, I'm not sure, what is appropriate. And at that point, there was so much disruption. And while in my grade level, people were, slowly integrating, getting along and fine. But then those younger, as that person was much younger in what you just read, but they just looked at us like, who are these people, these white students that were there? And there was
What changed?
What
Was
changed?
was it the politics of the thing that killed the socialization? What was it?
Probably as more and more things were happening with assassinations and different things, whatever was going on, then we were looked at, not within my level of, because it was almost like 50-50 or 60-50 Black, but in the younger levels, the kids would look at us and there would be stabbings and fights and everything come lunch. I mean, it was just like everything was crazy because of what was going on, and understandably so, but it was, things changed over that from 6th grade through the middle of junior year, how things were going better in the sense of integration. But then once other things were happening, like you said, there were other things happening.
Yeah, no, the larger issues at play in society play themselves out on the schoolhouse. I think that there's no question. Susan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm curious about where you're from, because I'm also from south side of Chicago.
I went to Horseman and South Shore.
Yeah, I went to Bowen.
Okay, so you were the other.
Yeah. There's so many experiences. I look at my parents who I was born in Englewood. I'm from Englewood. My parents grew up in Englewood. My mother was the only white kid in her class, and the Irish white teachers would dress her up in green on St. Patrick's Day and give her privileges because she was white. And she felt she didn't like that. And also she was really close friends with other students in the class. And even when she was 80, she got together with some of these women that she knew from school. Then when I was in school, one reason I was Orthodox in my practice, so I went to a conservative congregation, and I was, how teenagers get disillusioned. My rabbi was the first one to move out of the neighborhood when the neighborhood was becoming more Black. This guy had gone south and marched for civil rights. But when it came to his family, first one to move out. And that was just the beginning for me. It was like, I just, you associate, rabbis have a lot to Dan, watch out.
Terrifying, isn't it? It's really scary. That's
yeah,
right.
When a teenager looks up and, what's the behavior? What are people actually doing as opposed to ideas, you know.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So here,
And
King is going to go right to this, I think here. So
yeah,
what's the difference? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? I really like this. So I'm partial to this, but you can disagree with it. That's fine, you know, as long as we're all polite here. But a just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put in the terms of Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is rooted in eternal and natural law. An unjust law, I'm going to say that again. An unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law, this is beautiful, that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who we've studied here on a number of occasions, substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship, and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and awful. I hope you are able to ace the distinction I'm trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would a rabid segregationist. That leads to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience to the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. And I'll just point out, if you haven't had a chance to see our Rabbi Lou program from this past Sunday, it was tremendous. It's on our YouTube channel, and we saw images of Rabbi Lou being arrested. And we heard stories of him protesting the death penalty, which he considered to be unjust. And we saw him willingly and lovingly able to accept the penalty that was imposed on him for his nonviolent resistance. I just wanted to add that in there because it's important. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. So let's go take a look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You guys know them, don't you? They are from our book of Daniel. Book I'm slightly partial to. All right, so here we go. Chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits broad, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar then sent word to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, and the judges, and to attend this dedication of the statue that he had set up. So everybody assembled for the dedication and stood before the statue. The herald proclaimed in a loud voice, "You are commanded, O peoples and nations of every language, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, any other instrument, to fall down and to worship the statue of gold that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever will not fall down and worship shall at once be thrown into a burning fiery furnace." I forget who mentioned Queen Esther, but similar sort of in terms of Mordecai refusing to bow down before Haman. Here, well, you'll see, everyone is now required to bow down. So as soon as all the people heard the sounds, all the peoples of every nation, of every language fell down and worshiped the statue of gold. Seizing the occasion, certain Chaldeans came forward to slander the Jews, and they spoke up and they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Oh, king, you gave that order that whoever falls down or who doesn't fall down should be thrown into the fiery furnace. There are some Jews among you who are appointed to administer the providence of Babylon, who are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your God or worship the statue of God that you have set up." Right? These are wonderful people who work in every administration, right? Who are always fomenting ill will and strife. So what does Nebuchadnezzar do? Very Esther-like, Haman-like. In a raging fury, he orders Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought, so that these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar speaks to them and says, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my God or worship the statue of gold that I have set up?" And he says, "Now, if you're ready to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, when you hear the sound, then well and good. But if you will not worship, you shall at once be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. And what God is there that can save you from my power?" All right, what do you do at this point, kids? You're called in front of Nebuchadnezzar. He wants you to bow down in front of his golden statue. What do? Come on, you're the mayor of the town. You're an official. You're an important person, okay? You're a political figure. You're the mayor. You're in a country. The ruler of the country says you have responsibility over your little community of Jews. Don't get thrown into just bow down like the rest of us. What do? Come on, we all bow down. We all bowed down, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not. So what happens? They said, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter, for if so, it must be our God whom we serve is able to save us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will save us from your power, O king. But even if he does not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your God or worship the statue of gold that you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar, so filled with rage at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his visage was distorted, and he gave an order to heat up the furnace 7 times its usual heat, commanded the strongest men to bind them and throw them into the furnace. And so they were bound and thrown into the furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the fire was heated so much, a tongue of flame killed the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But those 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, dropped bound into the burning fiery furnace. And King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and rising in haste addressed his companions, saying, "Did we not throw 3 men bound into the fire?" And they spoke, "Surely, O king." He said, "But I see 4 men walking around unbound and unharmed in the fire, and the 4th looks like a divine being." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the hatch of the fiery furnace, and he had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fire. Right? A beautiful story for those who might not have studied it in a while that Dr. King is referring to. So who are we going to be like? When is civil disobedience called for? It was evident sublimely from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he talks about the early Christians. In our nation, he even cites the Boston Tea Party. He says we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at that time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocating disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. Okay, this is finally the crux. How long did it take me to get to the crux? Only 45 minutes. Perfect. I've been setting you up for this paragraph here. I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian, Jewish, and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last 2 years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you and the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Any thoughts, any comments on that? Do you agree? Because one of the things I found in my, go, you talk, Don. I don't want to talk. You talk.
Well, interesting to hear this. I'm more lukewarm. I'm not going to, I mean, I'd be honest.
You're the problem, Don.
I know. And so I don't know exactly who, I get what he's saying, you know, as a theory, but if he's talking to me, I'm sort of lukewarm. I don't go out of my way. I mean, I'm a nice guy. I you know,
So this letter is written for you. This letter is written to stir your moral soul.
Could be. Okay. Also, though I came to the planet, I was born to do what I'm supposed to do. So I'm not necessarily born to do what he's advocating. I came to do what I'm to do with, which is in alignment with what Dr. King is saying, but it's in my way with the people that I'm doing it with. And so therefore,
that is the key problem of intersectionality. That is the key issue that we have. Keep going. Sorry for interrupting you.
Oh no, so I think that everybody is doing what they need to do. And like you said, and the judgment that we're putting on people, if you're white, this is the way you're supposed to be. If you're a Jew, this is the way you're supposed to be. If you're Black, this is the way you're supposed to be. If you're gay, this is the way you're supposed to be. There's no freedom in that. There's no freedom at all in that. And I think we need to go to a deeper level of the individual being free and to honor that, so that I can look at you and say, what do you believe? And not look at your face or that you're a rabbi.
I adore that. And I think so does Dr. King. So he writes here, he gives a whole speech about freedom. Oh my goodness, it's cut out of this section. Hold on a second. That's not what I want. Here. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I'd hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct actions are not the creators of the tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open. So you're able to ignore it, Don, because you're doing your thing and he doesn't want you to be able to ignore it any longer. And that's perhaps he's now encroaching on your sort of the way the world works for you, and you need to, you have your mission that God has given you. And he is trying to disrupt that and create a little bit of tension to get you to see that, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all of its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, so too must injustice be exposed with all the tension that its exposure creates to the light of human consciousness and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But is this logical? Isn't this like condemning a robbed man because he has money when the evil act of robbery takes place? Isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to the truth and his philosophical inquiries precipitated the act by the misguided populace in which they made him drink hemlock? I also hope that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. This is the part I wanted for you, Don. I just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, all Christians know that the colored people receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of goodwill. Isn't that the truth? But we have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. Human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. I guess, Don, he's trying to co-opt you into his campaign, and he's not going to be happy if you're not going to participate in it. Time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. So we have to use time creatively, in the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. Go right ahead, Don.
I mean, whatever. I mean,
Keep going. Do it.
I just don't, I think he was talking more philosophically. I don't think he was
He's not touching you. No, that's good. That's a
He wasn't
homiletical criticism. I like it.
Yeah, he wasn't talking to me. He wasn't, I know it. I mean, I don't know him. He wasn't talking to me on the higher level. I can connect with him and I know what he's talking about. And I think if he were here, he would say, I am doing what he would want me to do in my way.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not, I think he's talking to me more. I take the critique more heavy than you take the critique, because he's talking to moderate white clergy, which I believe I fall into that category by definition. So I take the critique pretty heavy. But thank you for that. Let me go on a little bit here, as a couple more minutes are left. Oppressed people, oh, this is really great stuff. I've tried to stand between these two forces. He talks about the force of Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, saying that we need emulate neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred of the Black nationalist. For there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God that through the influence of the church, the Negro church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, by now many streets of the South would, I am convinced, be flowing with blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble-rousers and outside agitators those of us who employ nonviolent direct action, if they refuse to support our efforts, millions of Negroes will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace in Black nationalist ideologies, a development that would inevitably lead to a frightening racial nightmare. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself. And that's what has happened to the American Negro, he says. He says the Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. Let them march. Let them have prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Let them go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I've tried to say that this normal and unhealthy discontent can be channeled into the creative outlet of nonviolent, direct action. All right, I told you I'd get through the whole piece in the hour, right? Didn't I tell you, didn't I promise you I would get through the whole, and you see I've done that. Okay, no, clearly I haven't done that. But I think Don, I think he's almost directly responding to you here. He's saying, you might get me philosophically, and you might think this is all a clergy guy in a prison cell writing philosophically, but that's fine. And he's saying it's this philosophy itself, this Gandhian nonviolent philosophy itself is saving lives. The philosophy is needed. Otherwise, without that philosophy, you'll have extremism and the situation will be much worse. So for your own sake, support me and my nonviolent philosophy for your own good. Almost, he seems to be saying here. I've got 2 minutes left.
He was right.
Well, that's why we have a day named for him, and that's why we read him every year, for sure. Yeah, go right ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I just think that I totally agree. And I look at the philosophy as a backbone of the structure of what we should be doing. It's just, what do you do? I mean, there are just so many options. Is an angry tweet going to suffice? Is paying money to these people going to suffice? Getting out in there to suffice? I think maybe all of the above are important, but in some ways it feels kind of helpless and never enough. And so that's kind of my conundrum. That's what I kind of come to. Yes, I want to do these things. And yes, we try to strive for doing these things. But it's just this pendulum just keeps going back and forth, and it never really, I just ultimately think the progress has taken place, and Martin Luther King espoused these things in the sense like Johnson's Civil Rights Act and so on and so forth has come. It's been ultimately, it's kind of swinging back the other direction now, and it's tough.
I agree. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned, I mean, when you talk like that, I think of Tikkun Olam, Bob, and I always think, well, Tikkun Olam is like, I can't fix the whole world. I wouldn't even know where to start. Like, come on, please. That's just too much to impose upon anybody. Like, oh, you should do Tikkun Olam. Like, I can't fix my closet. Like, literally, when my father-in-law comes, he makes fun of me because I have broken shelves. I mean, that's the truth. So to repair the world is, like you said, outsized. And I always say, like, repair your home, repair your soul, repair your neighborhood, repair your block, like that. I mean, and then from there, will, God willing, expand outwards. And I think now that I listen to you here, that's why he started by saying why he came to Birmingham, because he's the outsider claim, perhaps is the most threatening one to him at all. And that's the first, we began with that. That was the hit from that letter that bothered him the most. And that's the thing that still concerns Don, which is, well, you're really going out of your way here. So it's interesting. And obviously we don't have a resolution for it, but I relate to this idea that tikkuning the olam is just something that feels so dispiriting to people. I think, like, I can fix maybe my block, the shul, so the whole world is tough. Thank you. I'm going to stop here. It's 1 o'clock, but this was lovely. It's very important. And every year I read Dr. King, it's just more on the surface. It's just right here, right now. If there are ideas for what you would like to discuss next week, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just choose what I like, as I always do. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Shirkon.
Thank
So
you.
long. Bruch
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
With tuition in mind.